Congratulations, Detective. Because of your help, we can now close the case of the killing of Professor Alex Sarch. To summarize, Mr. Christoph Turek could be eliminated. Even though he was the last known person to see Professor Sarch alive before the professor was killed, Mr. Turek's innocence was provable by his phone records. He was in Eastbourne during the time of the murder. He has no car, and therefore, a taxi was his only means of transport. Want to break free? Dr. Emily Finch could also be eliminated. She could be proven innocent because she too was not in Guildford at the time of the murder. Now, while Dr. Finch had a motive to kill Professor Sarch for taking away her beloved legal skills sessions, her email logs and receipt demonstrates that she was completing a horse racing experience at the time. I want to break free. This brings us to Mr. Nick Clapham. Now, he was revealed as the writer of the defamatory blog posts, which he wrote using an alias, Phyllis Coachman, which I'm sure you may have noticed was an anagram of Nicholas Clapham. And Mr. Clapham lied about where he was at the time of the murder because he was at the School of Law. He was painting a threatening message on Professor Sarch's office wall. He wanted Professor Sarch to leave Surrey so that as second in command, he, Mr. Clapham, could become the new head of law. But Mr. Clapham did not kill Professor Sarch. I want to break free from your lies, you're so self-satisfied. This brings us to Mr. Timothy James, who went looking for Professor Sarch on the night the professor was killed. Closed caption television demonstrates Mr. James checking the pub and then leaving. A witness, Dr. Ambrose Lee, indicated that Mr. James was angrily walking back in the direction of his house, which was the opposite direction of the location of the killing of Professor Sarch. The next morning, Mr. James found Professor Sarch's body, which, to be sure, added further suspicion upon Mr. James. But as we shall see, it was not Mr. James who killed Professor Sarch. In fact, the killer of Professor Alex Sarch was none other than what the hell is that? As I was saying, the killer of Professor Alex Sarch was none other than Ms. Katie Peters. Now, the torn note that was found in Ms. Peters' office was a letter from her late mother, revealing that Ms. Peters had a half-brother who was abandoned and subsequently put up for adoption. And we now know that this half-brother was none other than Professor Alex Sarch, who had an unknown place of birth on the autopsy report. We can assume from Ms. Peters' text records that she had told Mr. James about the adoption, and that Mr. James went to confront Professor Sarch, knowing that Professor Sarch would be at the pub because of the professor's email, and Mr. James was angry that his friend was dealing with the grief alone. With Mr. James out of the house, Ms. Peters was able to leave unnoticed, and seemingly concerned about what Mr. James might do, Ms. Peters called Professor Sarch and convinced him to take a different route home. Now, Ms. Peters took with her a mug of water, presumably to sober up the professor. The mug matched the ceramic found by the riverbed, and we know that this was Ms. Peters' mug because she was pictured with it in the School of Law group photo posted in the newspaper article. And Ms. Peters caught up with Professor Sarch by the river, and we believe that Ms. Peters told Professor Sarch the truth, and that Professor Sarch got angry. We have the testimony of the bartender that Professor Sarch gets especially angry when drunk. And we believe that in an effort to defend herself, Ms. Peters hit Professor Sarch over the head with the mug, causing the cut to the left side of his forehead. And we believe that the alcohol and pain caused him to stumble, and that he fell face first into the river, where he drowned. And then Ms. Peters was able to run back to Mr. James's house before Mr. James got home and pretended that she never left. Well, there it is. Congratulations. We hope that you enjoyed this. And most importantly, we'd all like to wish you a very, very productive and positive spring term here back at the University of Surrey. Thanks.